Welcome to Writing for Peace Sunday Live. I am so pleased and excited to welcome Noah Davis to Sunday Live. And he has, I'm not sure if he's reading from other pieces or just Of This River, but Of This River knocked my socks off. So if he doesn't read anything else, you will be very happy, absolutely very happy. So I have started a nod to previous poets, especially since this is the 10th year anniversary for Writing for Peace. And tonight, although I don't believe he was a Writing for Peace member, I think W.S. Merwin probably would have been. And here's a short Merwin poem. Witness. I want to tell you what the forests were like. I will have to speak in a forgotten language. W.S. Merwin from The Essential Merwin. Okay, so we have a bio here. Let's switch it back over. Let's see. I'm going to switch that off. Okay, the bio for Noah. Noah Davis grew up in Tipton, Pennsylvania, and writes about the Allegheny Front. Davis's manuscript of this river, Davis's manuscript of this river was selected by the George Ella Lyon for the 2019 Wheelbarrow Emerging Poet Book Prize from Michigan State University's Center for Poetry. And his poems and prose have appeared in The Sun, Best New Poets, Orion, North American Review, River Teeth, Sou'wester, Chautauqua, among others. His work has been nominated His work has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize by Poet Lore and Natural Bridge, and he has been awarded a Katharine Bakeless Nason Fellowship at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the 2018 Ritchie Appalachian Literature Fellowship from Lincoln Memorial University. Davis earned an MFA from Indiana University and now lives with his wife, Nikea, in Missoula, Montana. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you so much for having me. Feels good to be here. Thank you all for coming and spending a Sunday evening here. It's really an honor. I said when I got on that it was an honor to be selected for this reading series. So many writers that I admire have already been on this year, and it's been a real wonderful light to have every week. So truly an honor to be here. Thank you for reading the W.S. Merwin poem. to start, because he did the epigraph, or I chose his one of his lines for an epigraph for this book. So perfect.
Oh, fantastic. So we're going to start out with a question. The question about an informative book from your youth. What's a book that was impactful or lasting, or maybe you keep going back to?
Mm-hmm. I was scrambling a little bit before this reading. I actually FaceTimed my mama. She about a children's book, because I couldn't remember the name of the title, and she couldn't either. But it's something along the lines of Fox's Winter Walk, and it's a children's book. The illustrations are incredible. I think that they're only about less than 20 words, as most wonderful children's books are. And the illustrations, though, really showed me how things are always other things. And so as our fox moves through the landscape, she looks at the trees and the ice in the trees, and how at some points they look like swans, and at others they look like deer. And at other times they look like her mother, and so I think my earliest memory of that is around 5 or 6 years old, and so I think that you're a poet whenever you love that book, and I think that a lot of poets, maybe not that specific book, but have a children's book that shows them that things are always other things, and it's always connected.
Sounds like it maybe helped hone your poet's eye for detail and possibility and metaphor. Definitely. Yes, lovely. Well, what would you like to read first for us?
I'm going to read a poem called Crepuscular, which was a word that I heard on a nature documentary, and I couldn't believe it it was the crepuscular is that moment when night becomes day, or day becomes night. It's those edges, and it was a documentary about deer and how they're crepuscular animals. They like to move along that, and so thinking of that liminal space of day and night. Crepuscular. Two water thrushes followed me into sleep, and we moved about each other there, never touching, but moving with the intent of touch. A measured distance I'd believed I'd always share with birds, even though my grandfather caught goldfinches and brought them to the cage of his ear, where they waited to swallow the banking sounds of grief's blue lines, which keep us tethered in this place. And the next poem it's titled Saint Francis. I don't know if any of you know the writer Michael McGriff, but he teaches here in Idaho. But whenever I was an undergrad, I read a poem of his that was titled The Last Temptation of Christ, and it talks all about how Christ is here now among us, but he has a CB scanner and he's having an affair, and he has a concealed weapons permit. And so what is this Jesus here doing in the Pacific Northwest in the 21st century? And I was just blown away by that poem. And I love the idea of putting these religious figures here into the 21st century. And obviously Michael McGriff isn't the first, but that was the definitely move toward this poem. And I went to Seton Hill University, which is a Catholic liberal arts school in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And I played basketball there. And so we were always traveling around to all the different small colleges, Division II colleges in West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And we were going down to Wheeling Jesuit, and just like anything that happens when you're driving 65 miles per hour on the highway, it happened in a second. But I saw a man in a pickup truck picking a dead deer up off the side of the road and putting it in his pickup truck. And obviously we've all driven around on highways or on roads, and there's roadkill, and those are sadly the lives that we sacrifice for going fast in our world. And so I thought immediately, I was like, oh, well, that's St. Francis, isn't it? Right there in the 21st century, what is St. Francis doing? So this is to that St. Francis on the highway and between Greensburg and Wheeling. St. Francis. A Marlboro pinched between his lips, he strains against the weight of a still warm deer on the road to Fostoria. He uses a rope to raise the dead, a noose around the neck. It's a doe, and she joins the four others in the bed, laying her head on the white belly of the one missing her front legs. He says a prayer as he massages his forearms, muscle bound with a morning's work. At the deer dump, maintained by the Department of Transportation, he rolls the bodies in with hundreds of others. Many rejoice at his return. Eagles, vultures, crows, and hawks of nearly every stripe, and the carrion beetles and maggots that offer the benediction by scouring the bones. When he hunts, he loves to warm his hands in the chest of a deer taken in snow. As he grips the steering wheel, he remembers dragging animals by their ankles through fields, leaving behind a bloody language. Before he drives out of the pit, he sounds the truck's horn, and from their perches upon decaying flesh, a great menagerie of sated angels beat their wings, leaving behind a sky full of leaden feathers.
What a fabulous poem. I was thinking about, I listened to the podcast I mentioned with you and your father, Todd, and I read the interviews and did a bunch of homework this week. But one thing I came back to a few different times is your love of story. And so I was kind of echoing that off of what Amanda Gorman said, that she starts with words. And then I was wondering, well, does Noah start with stories first? But then just now you talked about starting with this image, an image or an experience. It's a story and it's a snippet. But where do you get more energy or impetus from for poems? Is there more weight in images or more weight in stories?
That's a really good question, and I'm so glad that you brought up Amanda Gorman, because my wife this week, after Amanda Gorman's really wonderful performance, Nikea read or heard that Amanda Gorman starts with words, and Nikea was like, "Oh, well, my husband, who is also a poet, starts with images. That's so strange." And I just said, Nikea did not grow up in a poetry family, so I know that was that was something for her to be like, "Oh, I actually know a poet that does something different too." So that made me smile. But yeah, I do. I always start with images, and then because I'm a narrative creature, I think that the region that I grew up in, central Pennsylvania, the stories were always the thing that fascinated me the most, always by elders, either people that were in the barber shop or in line at the grocery store, or in between basketball games.
Yes.
There was always a story trying to be told. And so I always start with an image, but I play with that image to see what type of story can be pulled out of it. Is that image the beginning, the middle, or the end of the story? And sometimes it can be all three. I love one of my most consistent influences over my very young poetry life has been the ancient Chinese wilderness poems and poets. David Hinton's Mountain Home, that anthology is really impactful to me. And so understanding the power of what an image can be, and to let that image breathe and be its own self really helps out.
Yes, I wrote down, and I've been working between 10 and 14-hour days, so it's trying to process quickly for me. But I wrote down an observation about of this river. It's just a quick one, but a collection that does not read like your typical book of poetry. For me, Faulkner, Carson McCullers, Ray Carver, Brian Doyle, Patty Ann Rogers are some names that come to mind. All for various reasons, but at the heart is the beautiful storytelling. More of a narrative form, yet not as it's formatted on the page. And I have to say that I was reading from my e-reader. I have a hiatus of no more purchasing real books until I move to a bigger place. I took out 12 boxes, so it's on the side. So I know it's formatted differently on the page. But it reads as if it's not a book of poems yet. Yet, in all the careful selection of details around land, the animals, your beloved people, there is music, resonant images, and perfect, yes, I will say perfect lines to convey the landscape and myth and simple humanity of the people living there. Because of these tight, beautiful lines, but they just convey so much. And I'll let you read some of the poems further so we can experience more of that. But just blew me away, Noah. this book really does. So what's next to read?
Well, thank you, Juniper. That is some of the highest praise. That is truly. Thank you. We're going to actually start with the first poem in the collection. Or I guess not start. We're gonna get to the first poem in the collection. Because yes, this was not what I envisioned whenever I started to write these poems. I did not know that I was going to find an arc, but this is where that arc begins. Drowning as taught by short-haired girl. I don't remember the moment my head hit the rock, because I was still in the moment of entering water. But while the water entered me, I did recognize the sleeve of reservoir, like a fish finning toward the empty space between my gums and lips. And as blood billowed from my head, I thought of the snapping turtles at the base of the dam, how they waited in the cold mud for me to become meat, a lesson they learned from eating all of those who drowned before me. I I never think about drowning except when I'm far away from water. I don't know why that is. I spend days. I mean, actually, it's more like months around water. Most of it's all frozen around here now in the small streams, but the big rivers here, we're having a very mild winter in Missoula. But whenever I'm fishing or hiking or wading around water, there's never a danger, and I never am thinking about writing drowning poems. But it's only when I'm away from it.
When you're away from it. So out of curiosity, I'm going to ask you to share about Short-Haired Girl
Okay.
in a bit. But before I do that, I was just wondering if maybe she evolved, or some of those poems evolved out of place, out of that region. Was it more while you were in Indiana? Was it more while you were in Montana? I don't know the timeline of where you were living in these different places, but away from instead of being in the place.
Yeah. Another really wonderful poet here is Daniel Lassel, who's kind enough to be watching, and we've had some really lovely conversations about. He grew up in Kentucky and has a really wonderful book coming out again from Wheelbarrow Books this coming summer. But yeah, that idea of writing after you've left a place and that type of longing that happens. I I don't expect, but I truly hope that I get to return home to those mountains. And I've continued to move west in grad school in Indiana, and then now here in Montana, and I've loved both of those places dearly. They've helped me become a much better writer in person. But yeah, writing about Short-Haired Girl while I was in Indiana. Um, I remember sharing with my dad a few bad poems, and he was like, "You're just homesick. Like these are just homesick poems." And he's like, "So I think you can get a little bit. You can do better." And thankfully, yeah, these Short-Haired Girl poems were able to evolve from those. But definitely the acuteness, the admiration that I felt from being distant from those mountains really helped me see it in a much clearer way.
Mhm. Will you read a Short-Haired Girl poem, and then
Yes, I
let me
will.
ask you a question about her, maybe?
Yes, and you know what? I'm gonna read this. I spent Thursday morning talking with three different sixth grade classrooms in Central PA on Zoom, and they all asked me, "What's your favorite poem?" And I was like, "That's like picking your favorite kid. We all have it, but we can't say it out loud." And they were like, "You," and they went right over their heads. But I landed on this one was my favorite Short-Haired Girl poem. Short-Haired Girl praises a child on a horse. When I see a child sitting on a horse, I believe for a moment they are the same animal, like owls sleeping in larch trees, like geese resting between cattails. I believe this more if the child isn't wearing a shirt, like hummingbirds sipping cardinal flowers, like dragonflies drying wings on laurel. If they cross a river, the child and horse become even closer, a single wet body, like bees trembling spice bush, like lace wings climbing moss. Out of the river, water drips down the child's legs and over the horse's stomach. River water becomes child's water. Child's water becomes horse's water. Water must return to earth like all children and their horses.
Understandable that why that might be your favorite child. Yes. Yeah. So the trying to think of which question to start with first, but I guess the one I'll drop into is, prior to the short-haired girl appearing on the page and in your poems, had you questioned other writers writing from a different gender or class from which they were walking and living and breathing in? And the second part, when it came up in workshop, were you deterred at all when they were saying, hey, you know, not a good deal, or did you just not miss a beat and plow forward? So.
Oh, yes, that's for someone who looks like me and comes from the background that I have. I had to do some major thinking and lots of conversations with people a lot smarter than me to make sure that I was stepping right, because there's been obviously the history that we all know of that type of appropriation. And I felt extremely blessed that I was there at IU with Adrian Matika, and obviously his Big Smoke persona poems are incredible. And so he was definitely one of the major mentors for me, of making sure that I was, one, being honest to myself, being honest to the people, being honest to the place, and being prepared also for whenever I do misstep, to make sure that I listen and I correct that. And so yes, whenever I had the workshop experience, I remember being, I mean, a little physically like, oh no, like you have that reaction of, oh my, what did I do? But again, just taking time, which as a 25-year-old dude, I I still don't know how to take time at all, right? I have no conception of that, but it really was good for me to take a breath around that, and to move then back into it from a different angle, and really brace myself and research myself and make sure that I was doing it not only for whatever gain I could, but more as just what are these stories?
Uh, I think it's brilliant. And I mean, I think that the voice and what you focus on and what you bring to the page, and the bravery in this climate to do that, right? Because so many people are being challenged for doing that. But I think it is brilliant and beautiful. And I'm grateful that you did. And I mentioned one question like this. There's this correlation between coasts and like the land that you grew up in and where I grew up, and the level of poverty and socioeconomic and environmental issues on both coasts. And I was reflecting on that and thinking about some of the voices that maybe I need to bring to the page in a like way. So you've made me think about many things in that respect, not just being from the woman's perspective, a man writing from the woman's perspective or a young woman's perspective, but very beautifully so. I would like to, if it's okay with you, get an audience question in and then have you read some more poems or other writing if you brought something else. But the question is from Laura Mahal, and she says, I'm very curious about your style and how upbringing / environment may have shaped your words. People in Western PA are friendly, embracing, and your poetry has that friendly storytelling style of embracing your audience. Do you have to work hard to shear your poems down? Shear, SHEAR, shear your poems down. Do they start out longer as lyric stories?
That's really good. Yes, Western PA. That's yeah. I definitely overwrite. I write all of my poems, stories, whatever, out longhand, and all of my poems are just blocks of prose, typically, before I transfer them onto my computer, and then that's whenever I do the line breaks. But and for that reason, I think that the form of that shows that I'm really trying to tell that story. And I think what poetry does, because poetry is language distilled, we can say a lot more with those distilled words than we would in a longer phrase. But as most people, I think, know, if you grow up in rural areas, you know that rural storytellers have some of the most colorful language with metaphors and similes that you can't even believe.
Yes.
And so I there are some phrases in here that I took directly from just hearing them always repeated in language and in different ways. And I think that there's also an issue whenever you're writing with a regional dialect. I do not think that I go very heavy into a regional dialect at all. But there were still some words that people would question. Well, like what is that actually? We had to go and look that up. I've never heard that before. If you all know the writer Ron Rash, he does a lot of different characters that do have that Western North Carolina heavy dialect. But yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, totally environment, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you for asking it, Laura. Yeah. So you ready for some more poems?
Yes. Well, I love dreams, and I don't think we have enough dream poems in the world. And I remember there was one workshop, I forget where it was, but some elder in the poetry community said that whenever a poem starts in a dream, nothing matters anymore, because there's no tension. Anything can happen in a dream. We'll just go along. And I was like, oh, that's so dismissive. What a dream can do, and what it could tell you, and how fascinating that is. But so I'm going to read a dream poem, but you wouldn't know unless I told you. So this poem actually was an entire gift. And for all the writers out there that know when a gift comes, how thankful we are. So this dream happened over 3 nights, and it continued to restart all those 3 nights. Thank goodness I have a pen next to the bed. And it's a running title. So the first line is, "In fields where junco." In fields where junco wings strike goldenrod stalks in the dark, my future child visits. Her mouth opens and closes while 2 basswood trees on the hill mark each other's trunks. Wind swirls clockwise through their crowns. I say widowmaker, and she not before morning. So we wait together until the limbs long ago broken and caught dead in the canopy fall to earth, where storms also collapse. Has anybody eaten snapping turtle here? I don't know if anybody's eaten snapping turtle.
But I thought that poem was very interesting.
I'm gonna read a poem about snapping turtles. My great grandma, Grandma Messner, in Ohio, there were always 50-gallon oil drums outside the garage, and my cousins, they're clean of oil. They were just filled with spring water. But my cousins, they would catch snapping turtles and put them in the oil drums, because you have to make sure that the snapping turtles are eating good things before you cut them open and eat them, because usually they aren't eating really good tasting things. And so I remember as a little kid, my little brother and we would always go over as soon as we got to great grandma's house. We'd run over and see how many snapping turtles were in the oil drums. So this story comes from that. Oil as taught by short-haired girl. Graham kept snapping turtles in used oil drums by the garage, barrels full of spring water, not oil. We fed the turtles watermelon until shit covered the water's surface. My brother and I skimmed off the flakes like oil. When Graham was ready, we turned the barrels over in the yard and she shot the turtles in the head with the 22 Pap gave her. He believed you gave guns to the people you loved. She used a hatchet to break the shells. The shards in the grass were sharp and cut our feet. The meat boiled in vinegar for an hour on the stove. My brother and I watched Graham blow held breaths of cigarette out the window. She stared at the pump jack in the back field that brought oil to the surface from beneath the sheep. Graham's fingernail was orange from tar, and my brother asked why it wasn't black. That's why turtle meat was pink, because watermelon meat was pink. Graham laughed and said if we peeled her far enough back, she'd be dark as oil. My brother dipped the meat into the yellow egg wash, and I forked together flour, cornmeal, cayenne. Graham heated lard that turned to oil, the pink meat disappearing into its bubbles. We waited for the meat to float to the surface so we could pick out what looked like golden tongues with tongs. Graham dabbed a piece on a paper towel. She kept an ashtray by the sink and with her left hand stubbed out her cigarette while she held out the meat. My lips curled back from the heat and I tore the muscle away with my teeth. How much oil in me? How much oil in her? Someday, when we both become the ground, would a pump jack find that oil our bodies left in the clay?
What a fabulous story, fabulous poem. Do you have to read one more and then we'll hop to a question?
Yeah. How about just a happy poem? Whenever you're creating a collection, I've had so many wonderful conversations with people in my MFA. A few of them are here tonight, and so thank you very much. But we are always talking about like how do you create a first collection? Like how are you going to organize things? And we do that for our MFA thesis, obviously too. And so there's such a need or a want for such high stakes poems all the time, and because those are the high stakes poems that are going to get published in different journals, and so we want all of those in there. But that if they're all high stakes, they're all still one note. And so so a monotone collection can be no matter if they're all low poems, all medium poems, or all high poems. And so to work back and forth between that, I actually had to write poems to find the equilibrium for this. And so this one is thanks to Annie Dillard, obviously, the wonderful Annie Dillard. And this comes from a line of hers. The title comes from her. Every day is a God. The change in the sun's strength on bitter crest after the 1st of April, and the way pear tendrils catch between teeth while the rest of the fruit rubs the back of the throat in October, are two joys separated by seasons, bound across months by light, sugared with sap and northern flickers, who drill the sweet and whose song sends us tumbling, mouth first, so we have no choice but to taste what is firm.
Wonderful poem. I'm going to pause my question. I'm going to go over to an audience question, and it's from L. Renee. And it says, this beautiful collection includes some prose poems. I'm curious how you decided on this container for certain poems. Did the content inform the form, something else entirely?
Hi, Auntie. Good to see you. El Renee is one of my MFA really wonderful friends. And so, yeah, prose poems. I think it is more the story of it. I never, so I always write them out in a block of prose every time. But but I never leave them right away in there. So I always try out different line breaks. And I think a poem pretty quickly fights against that. Oh, there are those German shepherds I was warned about. But I think a poem fights pretty quickly against line breaks, and so if I work a week on different line breaks on a poem, and it's really bucking up against it, I return it back to the prose, and at that point I'll continue to fiddle with language, obviously, but I won't change form for about a month, and then that's usually when a poem will be like, no, I'm a prose. Like, don't try to make me something I'm not. I remember when I was a freshman in my undergrad, we had to bring in a poem to class. Somebody brought in a new poem every day, and I brought in a prose poem for the first day of class. And the professor asked me, well, is a prose poem a piece of prose or a poem? And I was like, you gotta be kidding me with that question. Are you really gonna try to have this 18-year-old decide if a prose poem is more prose than poetry? And so, but yes, I think that those poems definitely know themselves.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question and the detailed answer. Our organization also wants to foster and encourage young writers. So it's really good to hear a response like that about the thought process and the pieces. It was lovely. So thank you. And thank you for asking it. I'll hop over to, let's see. So one I alluded to a while ago and we talked about before the reading, but in the podcast, I heard you say that you were obsessed with the Appalachian region and landscape and how it shaped you. I drew comparisons between your landscape and the one of my youth on this coast, with what might be many of the same socioeconomic or environmental challenges, and considered my own obsessions with the stories and the people, most of which haven't made it to the page, but are what drive my many years of advocacy work, all of the different ways that I've been obsessed with it. After thinking about this and rereading most of this book a third time through today, I wondered how your obsession may appear in the world, not on the page or the pages of this book, perhaps through teaching or volunteering or something else. How does your obsession manifest in other ways?
Mm-hmm. I think most obviously through teaching. Growing up in rural in rural central Pennsylvania, being a writer with people, after growing up with people who are now working factory jobs, who are now driving truck, I understand my privilege, and I think anybody who grows up in a blue collar community and sees art as a calling, there's some level of guilt that comes with it, and this is coming from somebody whose father is even a poet. And so I knew that there were poets out there, and I knew what it meant to be a poet, and I still had to get over that. And I don't know if I ever actually will be able to get fully over it. I'm trying to. We work in so many different ways, but I think through teaching particularly, I want students to understand how their stories and their place is always valuable, and they should be told. And I think that as storytellers, as if we can go back all the way through human history and the role of storytellers for a community, what that means, and adds certainly lots of pressure with that too. But I continue to want students to know that stories can be told in a range of different ways, through the written word, through visual art, through film, through song, uh, and I particularly want that for rural, lower socioeconomic students. And then another part through the teaching is growing up in a very white area of Appalachia. We obviously have Frank X. Walker's Appalachia and that movement, which has just continued to grow, and that need to understand that Appalachia is not just all white folks, poor or affluent. It is a truly multicultural region of America. And so growing up and having this stereotype continually perpetuated, and even in our athletic conference, it was Mount Union is a predominantly Black community along the Juniata River, and it was just continued. Besides the 2 times a year that we played them in basketball and 2 times that we played them in football, they were never acknowledged. And so I would also love to continue to educate young white rural people to understand that you have a diversity around you that needs to be acknowledged and celebrated, and to find that common ground and community of the place that you love. The water is running by everybody. It's always going downstream.
Yes. Well, thank you for exploring that question and that lovely answer. I expected no less from you, but I wasn't sure how you would answer it. So I had kind of a fun question, and then I'd like you to read a few poems before we close out, if that's okay. And that is, actually, we might even get one more question in, but your fishing prowess is well documented on Instagram. Your basketball, yes, your basketball successes are easily found online. Of this river is resounding evidence of your writing craft and abilities. What is something that you are willing to share with us that you are just learning with a beginner's mind? Or maybe share with us a little known skill or success, whether hacky sack or berry picking or playing the harmonica or something such.
So something that I'm coming to with a new knowledge, is learning the woods around here in Western Montana. Growing up in the expansive deciduous forests of Appalachia, I'm coming with very little knowledge of the flora and fauna out here, and so that has been extremely frustrating and fulfilling at the same time, because whenever I walk into the woods at home, I feel so confident. I mean, those trees are my neighbors already. I know them by name and we see each other every day. But so now trying to find a new ecological community out here has definitely had frustrations, but it's been very rewarding. And so if anybody has good field guides, Western friendly field guides for the Rocky Mountains, I'd be appreciative. And then a little known skill that I have. Oh, my baking and cooking. I I bake at least I bake cookies or cakes or crisp crumbles at least 4 times a week. I like to have a bowl of cookie dough in the refrigerator starting Sunday night, and then I just bake 3 or 4 every night to stretch it out. And we have now an incredibly wonderful cast iron Dutch oven, and so I've been frying a lot of donuts in that. So yeah, that's what I'd say I've been doing.
You'll end up with a whole bunch of new neighbors there in Montana. They learned about your baking skills.
Well, just sounded on the porch and running, saying Agnes.
That's right. Well, how about if you read something else for us, please?
Yeah. About how many more until the end?
Well, of course, it depends on length. What we usually do is we go till about, I'm in Pacific Standard Time, so about 6 o'clock. And then
Okay.
we keep it open for an after party for about 15 or 20 minutes for people to ask additional questions or just say hey. And so if it goes over a little bit, nobody's going to kick you out or pull you off with a hook or anything.
Sure.
So it
I just
depends.
didn't know if I needed to have a closing poem ready yet.
How about one poem and then a closing poem? Does that
Okay.
sound good? Depending on how long they are, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
I was hoping you'd
I'm a
read.
short poem writer.
I was hoping you would read the poem Skin.
Oh,
I haven't made any requests yet, but that was amazing. And then we also have an announcement from our editor too that we need to sneak into. So.
okay, so yeah, this will be the penultimate poem. That's one of the MFA words I learned. Skins. In this valley, where mules catch pigeons in their mouths, women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs, while babies wail out from their red rooms. Come wailing out and away from these snake skins with the fear strongest when we can only see shapes. And the fear lives in these shapes until one day in January, these babies who have grown into children carrying their own fear hike to a talus slope and with axes chop away a chestnut stump, where they find 30 rattlesnakes curled and cold and kill every one of them. These babies, grown large enough to carry dead snakes in their hands, lay the snakes on the snow in shapes only hawks can read. In this valley, where bees build honeycomb between railroad ties, women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs, while babies wail out from their red rooms. When the babies are teething, these mothers lay rattlesnake skins on swollen gums. These babies, grown into children who know what it means to have rattlesnake skins in their mouths, which they remember as they hike through groves of bare oak and hear the snake's metallic buzzing and speak to the snake in a way only bodies who have been together since breath began know how. In this valley, where bears walk upright on the road, women wrap rattlesnake skins around their daughters' thighs while babies wail out from their red rooms. The mothers wipe mucus and blood from their babies' cheeks and bellies with the rattlesnake skins. And because the skins of these babies are new, the scales mark their cheeks and bellies until fathers come and scrub away the divoted prints. When these babies grow into girls and boys who want hands to touch them, they recognize who else was born in this valley by rubbing their hands over cheeks and bellies and finding the keratin memory of rattlesnake scales left by mothers.
I have no words for that one. That was just amazing.
Thank you. I always preface it, and I'm sorry I didn't. This poem came about, this is folklore from Appalachia, where mothers, whenever a birth was taking a little too long and the mother was struggling, they would wrap a timber rattler skin around the thigh, believing that the baby wanted to get away from that. And so that would quicken the birth. And so whenever I came across that, I thought it was incredible, but it also makes us think about, well, what type of fear do we instill in children of the natural world right away? And then what are all the different opportunities or different ways of thinking that would happen with that rattlesnake skin? You can have the fear, but and then you can have also the community feel of it, and or just regular sadness around the death of a fellow community member. But it's amazing what you can find doing research. I guess I'll close with this poem then. This poem starts with a epigraph from Judges chapter 14 verses 8 through 9. Samson turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. He scooped out the honey with his hands and ate as he went along. Short-haired girl stops going to church. My donkey, Dame's Rocket, found a goat's skull in the back pasture. She carried it to me in her mouth, and I nailed the bone above the door of her shed. She admired the skull like I admire antlers. Bees waxed honeycomb in the eye sockets, and amber bulged over the nose where the lower jaw used to be. Honey dripped from the skull onto Dame's Rocket. She licked the sweet from her muzzle. The bee's hum settled in the darkest hair lining her shoulders, and I felt the whir of it in my legs when I rode her around the yard. 2 months ago, I woke before the bees and sat in front of Dame's Rocket's shed. I waited there for her to stand below the bone hive. Dozens of bee bodies, barely large enough to catch the light, slanted around her head. Golden buzzing like the hymns at church that made me cry. I stood and reached for the bone hive the same way Thomas must have reached into his Savior's ribbed hive. The honey was bee warm on my fingers, and I tasted the sweetness forever and ever. Amen.
Wonderful, wonderful. We had a question pop up, and Mr. O'Daly said, I apologize, but I have to run. What a treat to be introduced to your compelling, humane, beautifully conceived work, Noah. So that was William O'Daly. I wanted to make sure you saw that before we close out in case we lose the chat thread here. We have a question, and then I want to thank you again. It's how often does Christian imagery enter your work?
Not often. I was raised in the Mennonite church, a liberal Mennonite church in State College, Pennsylvania. So no coverings. Nobody had to paint their bumpers black. And it's a very hippie church, and I loved it. And I miss it every day, particularly every Sunday. I felt so lucky to grow up in that church. But as I wrote this book, I actually saw that a lot of the what are considered radical Christian ideas, but are truly just the base Christian ideas that we have commodified and done terrible things with. I saw that a more overt mentioning of it was not in there. I tried to write every poem with a reverence that I think I learned in church, but obviously Appalachia is full of several different types of religions, but I guess the loudest are different types of evangelical and proselytizing denominations. And so I definitely wanted to work that in because the character of short-haired girl grew up in that type of church, not the hippie State College, Pennsylvania Mennonite church. And so where would she find the beauty and the glory of God in a way? And whenever I thought about, oh well, honey in a goat skull is pretty, that's full of glory in so many different ways. I was like, yeah, I think that's definitely where she's going to find her church.
That's fabulous. Well, I have this comment that can you read the comments, Noah?
Yeah.
There's one at 5:53 that I want to make sure that you see or do a screenshot of from Laura Mahal and bring everybody's attention to it if you haven't already read it, because it's quite spectacular in its impact, just the reading itself.
Oh, that is very kind. That is very kind. Thank you, Laura.
If you don't have the chat on or comments on, I encourage you to take a look at it, and we're going to keep it open for a while. So let's see, we have one from Stan Sanvel Rubin, which is, love your honest, sensitive work. You are a fine poet. I know that part of Pennsylvania. Odd question. Did you ever hear stories of Bigfoot in those woods?
Oh yeah, squatching. Definitely. You just got to go up Bell's Gap Run, knock 3 times, and somebody will call back. That's our community's that's our community's folklore of Bigfoot. And I mean, I go up Bell's Gap a lot to fish, and I still have not seen any of his prints. So, but I mean, if he's in Pennsylvania, he's probably around Bellwood.
So I am going to do a couple of things. One, I want to give another thank you to you, Noah. It was a fabulous, fabulous conversation, and your writing is just wonderful. I appreciate you collaborating and sharing it here. I'm going to switch over to our editor. He has an announcement to make about potential submissions to our dovetails. And then we're going to open it back up to where everybody who's here can say hello or ask a question of Noah. And we'll keep it open until like 15 or 20 minutes after when we close it down. So I'm going to switch it over to Robert, and then we're going to come back. Don't take off it. And in just a minute, I'll switch it to where you can unmute yourself if you want to. But right now I'm switching to our editor. It should be okay. Robert?
Okay. Yes. So twice a year, Writing for Peace puts out an anthology called Dovetails, and we're promoting that right now. The theme this year is Letters from the Self to the World. The guest editor is Adriana Parmo, and the deadline is March 1st. The definition of letters from the self to the world is really open. You can write fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. We'll take any submissions, and it can be personal, political, anything. And as I said, it's open till March 1st. I'm going to cut and paste something onto the chat here.
Wonderful.
And it tells, in Adriana's words, what we're doing. And it gives a link to the submission page. We would love to hear from you.
And also, if you are able to, if you're not interested in submitting yourself, maybe you share that with other people, share the link, share the announcement. That would be appreciated. And yes, Tanya, it is open to people outside of the US.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay.
I'm going to switch it to where you can, okay. I just changed the settings, so you should be able to unmute yourself to say hello and to thank Noah.
Thank you,
Looks
Noah.
like-
Thank you.
Thank you, Juniper, for your loving messages about how wonderful Noah's work was and how much I would enjoy reading his work.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for showing up. I don't think that there was any false advertising in my messages, were there? Yes.
You were so enthusiastic and sincere that I really wanted to come.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Their family, I haven't met Noah's mom yet, but I first met Noah's dad, and then I met Noah in California a couple summers ago. And I can't imagine Noah's mom or his brother Nathan being any less fabulous. This is just one of those families where you want to know everybody. Yes. So thank you for joining us.
That'll happen, Juniper. That'll happen.
Yes, I certainly hope so. Anybody else want to say hello?
Hello, Noah. My
Hi,
name is
Kate.
Kate, and I grew up in New Jersey, camping at the Delaware Water Gap and heading to Pennsylvania, seeing farmlands. And then as a young person, going back to visit friends in the East Coast and family in New York is amazing to be out west. And so all I want to say is welcome to this wonderful place, from the richness of the deciduous trees and all the rivers that transported everything, and to the people that were pushed out of our eastern seaboard, the Lenni Lenape, that were all pushed west to Pennsylvania and further west, and then south to now being settled in Oklahoma. And that now there's this whole world of the Western culture of what we don't get to see is what has been robbed from us. And now the West will envelope this whole new sense of the people. And if this at iu.edu is the best place, I would love to write to you of what I've learned having left the East Coast 50 years ago and embraced this beautiful Rocky Mountain West. And the
Love
people
that.
I can list for you in Missoula will tour you and your wife into a wonderful world that you will write about forever.
Good. I would love that. I would love
Okay,
that. Yes,
that's the
yes.
best
This
place.
is my email.
You got it. It's going to come to you from Boutique Bravo.
Okay.
The kind of odd. Make a
No,
note.
I like alliteration a lot.
I lost my store, but that's one of the things, aside from lots of memory and story, is I saved my email. They could take away my lease, they could take away my woman on the block position, but they're not going to take away my email.
That's the way to go. That's the way to go. I look forward to that email.
Anybody else going to show your face, show your lovely face and say hello? We have a lot of people who are hiding behind their names, which is okay. But hi, Stan. It's great to see you.
I'm glad I made it. You know, the thing I saw about it said 6 o'clock, but I figured that was 5 o'clock from what you said.
That's
it said 6. I don't know why, because you're Pacific time. I'm Pacific time. I guess he isn't.
It's
So
it's the mountain time where it's created in Colorado. It's 6
Hey,
p.m.
You are a terrifically fine poet. Juniper was telling me with great affection and enthusiasm how strong and smart and human your work is, and I love it. It's very real, and never let anybody try to guilt you out of writing what is really yours to write. It's a terrible mistake of our era. So I admire it. And also, as the Pennsylvanian who asked about Bigfoot, I know some of that region. It's beautiful. There was a poet whose name I'll never remember. I wish I could. Long ago, gave a reading for me and said he's been touring Pennsylvania, and he stopped and said, Pennsylvania is like Alabama without the kudzu. Between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So that was a Southern poet's take on touring Pennsylvania. But did you ever hear the phrase Pennsyltucky?
Oh yes. Oh yes. And that's exactly where I live, Pennsylvania. There are a lot of
quite a real place.
It is, yes.
Gorgeous nature there that people don't actually know. Thank you. Thank you for the fine reading. Keep going. Enjoy Montana.
Thank you.
What we have more thank yous. Anybody else want to say hello? We can tie it up sooner if we need to, or if anybody else wants to. Oftentimes when the group gets smaller, somebody else is willing to pop on and say hello. So
yeah, I would like to say hello as well. Sorry. Yeah, thank you for the invite. I got the email from Carmel, and yes, I'm 2 times contributor to Dovetails before. Thank you so much. It was wonderful and touching poetry.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you for coming.
I just wanted to say hi to Juniper. So good to see you. And
It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for this lovely evening. It's good to hear my sweet boy read his poems. So thank
Yes, it's good to see both of you. Yes, yeah. Take good care.
you.
You finish up your icing, Dad.
Old man athletic injuries. That's what I'm doing.
No, don't rub those in, Noah. You'll have those one day
They're
too.
coming, they're coming for me soon.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to say hello?
I was just saying hello to Noah, and hi, Noah Dad, and give my best to Mom. Really lovely to see you again and see the little extra you got going on now, and hear your poems. And I did want to just share with you that I am teaching a Poetry 203 class, and we will learn about prose poems through your examples. So my lovely class is going to be learning about them, and I'm going to, I asked that question, I have an agenda so I could tell them. So thank you for sharing that.
Fabulous.
Love you.
Thanks for coming. See, oh, as I Stan, let me mute. Stan, you're seeing.
Yeah, I know.
Can you mute yourself? Or I'll try.
Yeah.
I'll try. There we go. Okay. Anybody else want to say hello before we close out?
I just want to say thank you from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. We have lots of mythology here, and I was really identifying with how your storytelling, because Cape Bretoners love to tell stories, and I think that your voice is reverent and sacred and also truthful, and I just really appreciated it, and I think that you'll motivate many others to write, and I thank you for that, because I think we need a lot of encouragement and hope right now in the world, and I thank you that you have that strong of a voice that you can speak through all that. Sorry, they're doing garbage here behind me, my men, but I thank you for your strong, hopeful voice, your strong, hopeful, and honest voice at this time. It's very much appreciated.
That means a lot.
And thank you for the invite, my lovely Juniper. And lovely to meet you all, because I know any friend of Juniper's is a friend of mine. We're in another group together, and she is beautiful inside and out, as you know. And I just want to call out to her loveliness.
Oh, I'm blushing. It's too dark, but now I'm blushing. Thank you very much. I send you a hug. It has been wonderful having you here tonight. Thank you.
Hug back. It's a little late, but I didn't want to miss his voice.
Oh, it's wonderful. Okie dokie. Well, if anybody else, I'll do it one more round. Please submit to Dovetails. Sunday Live, the next week we have Zoya Ahmed. She's a high school spoken word poet laureate of Sonoma County, January 31st. C. Marie Furman, poet, essayist, editor, February 14th. Michael Sims, poet, essayist, and editor, February 21st. Octavio Quintanilla, February 28th. He's a poet and fabulous artist. And then Jamin Hill, which I'm totally jazzed about. I mean, I'm jazzed about all of these, but he's a spoken word world champion, like second or third place. Just this high octane, lovely human, March 7th. So we have a lot of wonderful names of people coming up. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you, Noah. Just thank you. And this will be posted. I don't know the timeline, but within a week it will be on the Writing for Peace website, so you can recommend it for other people to be able to take a look at it. And this community means a great deal to me because of sharing word, because of the pandemic, but also if you're willing to spend an hour listening to a writer talk about words and listening to their words, you're a different kind of human, and I like how you move through the world. That might be the best way of saying it.
I love when you said okie dokie. I felt like a sisterhood with you immediately.
Well, I had to come up with many different words, especially Holy Cheerios. When I was teaching college, I couldn't cuss, and I grew up in a cussing family. So Holy Cheerios was a derivative of something that I could say and not get fired over at a community college. So
Those okie dokie sayers are just
yes.
special to me.
So thank you, good people. I'm going to close it out in just a couple of minutes, and good night. Hope to see you again soon. Take good care.
Be
Thank
well,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Juniper. That was incredible.
Oh, you're welcome, Noah. Yes. Hello and hug to Nikea.
I definitely, yes, hugs back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carmen. See you, Daniel.
See you, Noah. It was good to see you. Beautiful reading. And Todd, it's good to see you as well if you're still on.
Thanks for coming. Good night, Stan.